Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Leonard, presenting alongside Barris Tezel, Josh Robbins, and Joe Russell. And today we will be talking to you about Sparta Science and their impact on the Air Force. Before we get into the breakdown of the actual machine learning algorithm and the data breakdown of the company, just want to give you a brief introduction and layout of the business that Sparta Science employs. So overall, Sparta Science's goal is to employ data science and health management to set new standards for human performance. One of the ways they do this is to try and cut down on overuse and misuse injuries. As humans, we develop incorrect habits and improper form as we go about day-to-day operations like walking, running, jumping, etc. And by using a force plate, which I'll briefly explain on the next slide, Sparta is able to identify real-time strengths and weaknesses of the body's musculoskeletal makeup and recommend rehabilitation, fitness, and movement technique options to remediate these issues. Another thing that they stress is long and short-term physical health. Short-term injuries are super important to remediate, especially in high-stress situations like professional athletics or the military, but also they want to help promote the structural integrity of the human peak for as long as possible. Another main goal of theirs is to cater to any and all client needs. Most of Sparta's clientele at this point is high-ranking athletes or military personnel, but they want to expand their horizons to people of all ages, body types, and demographics to help them be as healthy as possible. How do they do this? Sparta employs what's called a force plate that utilizes ground forces exerted on it by the testers and converts the raw results into health metrics that help measure injury history in the past, present, and in the future, as well as give some basic performance scores that can help them understand what their clients are going through. The key selling point that Sparta stresses is real-time results. These are conducted by a set of 3 tests, a jump scan, a plank scan, and a balance scan, which we'll go into more detail about later, that take about a combined total of 90 seconds. These tests are converted to data and uploaded immediately to what's called a movement health profile, which is cloud-based and 100% personalized to the client. So our specific study is about the Special Warfare Airmen Division, which is a sect of the Air Force that acts as a liaison between ground forces of different military branches and the air, space, and cyber divisions of the Air Force. Because of their unique role in situations like special operations missions, the Special Warfare Airmen require a much higher added training level and advanced fitness levels according to the military's HPO strategy, or Human Performance Optimization. The number one problem in the Air Force and the military in general is availability. The Air Force spends a staggering $43 million a year on basic training injuries alone. So it's hard to imagine how that applies to the whole servicemen force. And also, they operate mostly on reserves. 75% of the Air Force members in the Special Warfare Airmen Division operate on a quarterly or monthly basis. So not all of them are on base at the same time. It's nearly impossible to unify and coordinate training programs that servicemen can follow at the same time. So that is what Sparta was brought in for. They're brought in to coordinate the Air National Guard's overall training program to achieve maximum readiness and unify schedules across divisions. I won't go into too much detail yet because that's for later in the presentation, but each soldier is scanned using Sparta's force plates and develops a movement signature, which establishes a training point or a training starting point to go off of and be continually scanned to improve their health and injury risk. And these scans create training plans, like I said, that usually start at the base level and have been applied to service members across the divisions. One in particular was the Master Sergeant, a super high-ranking individual in the Air Force that had this to say about Sparta's technology. Before Sparta Science, I had used many other workout plans built by prior service operators and professional strength competitors, but I suffered from daily knee pain as a result of every one of those programs. Sparta Science has built a workout tailored to our specific needs that has been, in my experience, a total game changer.
So now we're going to get into the data that Sparta Science uses. So the first step in the data collection process is to identify the subject's age, their sex, their sport, type of exercise, injury history, and group the subjects accordingly in Sparta's database. Next, in order to assess their strengths and weaknesses, their movement patterns, and their injury risks, the ASOS members use Sparta Scan, Sparta Science's assessment application to measure each member's movement qualities. So as Kyle mentioned before, these scans include vertical jump testing, planks, and balance scans. And they're repeated over the course of their training program, and adjustments are made to their regimen and track their progress. So each time these are completed, the members' data is instantly compared with Sparta's database of over 2 million scans, generating their movement signature. And once the data is collected, their software uses machine learning techniques to validate the data by identifying any potential collection errors. So the Sparta Science program focuses on 4 main types of data, which are time series data, raw data, normalized data, and Sparta metrics. So each force plate assessment initially provides time series data along the force time curve, which is used to calculate other metrics that explain performance and injury risk. This data is stored entirely in the company system's backend and is used for independent study. Once this is collected, it's used to calculate the raw data, a series of metrics that describe the force plate data signals. Next, the raw data is converted into normalized data, or T-scores, which are compared against Sparta's database and provide the basis for rankings and decision-making. Finally, the force plate machine learning software derives the Sparta metrics, actual metrics which are used to directly assess performance and injury risk. So the raw data, the normalized data, and the Sparta metrics are all available for direct viewing and download for its users. This process provides actionable metrics for athletes within a matter of minutes. Additionally, the time series and raw data are used to constantly refine Sparta's learning models and provided to applied scientists and researchers to better understand the relationship between movement patterns, injury risk, and injury prevention methods.
Now that we have considered the data collection methods and data types, it is important to consider the machine learning methods Sparta Science uses in its efforts to provide clients effective and reliable results. So as Kyle mentioned earlier in the presentation, force plate machine learning is the foundation of any results and feedback that Sparta Science is able to produce. After clients complete various exercises on the plate, the force that is measured is converted into electrical signals, which are then measured and standardized. After data are collected, they are stored in a data lake, which is essentially a storage area for large amounts of data. This data is then run through predictive models, of which Sparta Science uses neural networks. As Sparta Science continues to attract more clients in the military and athletic fields, these neural networks will provide more accurate results for their clients. When the data is run through these neural networks, it will lead to an individualized training program for each client, which is focused on strengthening the weaker areas that may lead to injury down the road. While the machine learning methods that Sparta Science uses in its effort to produce reliable and effective results is important, it's also important to consider the policy implications as well as the results of Sparta Science's efforts. So one area that we can see major results is the military leaders. In fact, they are the main beneficiary of Sparta Science's efforts. So after the cadets and military personnel receive results from Sparta Science's force plate machine learning, military leaders have access to this information, and then they can better know where to actually station their soldiers. For example, if it is a rough terrain, and the military leaders will know not to station certain troops if they are more susceptible to injury when climbing rough terrain. But it's also important to consider policy implications that this has had in the US or recent motivations to actually increase Sparta Science's force plate machine learning into military branches. So in 2021, or the current year, there has been increased efforts to add Sparta Science's research methods and force plate machine learning into other branches of the military. There have been increased efforts to force the Department of Defense in the United States to consider this and implement it across the Army, Navy, and Coast Guard. Of the two who are the most prominent people trying to stress the importance of Sparta Science's data and research methods are Jackie Speyer and Ro Khanna.
So let's move on to the possible limitations of the study. And the biggest one being, if you could go to the next slide, Kyle. Thank you so much. So the first one being numbers of users. So Sparta Science products relies heavily upon the number of users that use its product. So if Sparta Science does not possess a large user base, then the reliability and also the efficacy of the product is then depreciated. So people who use Sparta Science could then be unsatisfied with the product, causing them to leave negative reviews. So this would then further decrease the number of users, leading to a negative cycle, because once someone leaves a negative review, less people want to use the product, which then lowers the user base once again. So, however, to attract more people, the actual Sparta Science is backed by highly regarded medical institutions, such as Stanford Health and the Mayo Clinic, which helps boost reliability and again, increasing user base. So let us move on to the inferences and opinion section. So the first one is, what types of couriers are the most prone for injury? So the data collected by Sparta Science can actually help us track which careers are most prone for injury. And we can also see if certain careers lead to certain forms of injury, because different types of activity also leads to different types of injuries. So the variables we need to look at are the number of hours worked, the involvement of physical labor, the amount of time sitting versus time spent mobile, and the requirement of specific gear or uniform for the specific career. So if we look at, let's say, the Air Force, they're required to carry heavy amounts of equipment, which could also help injure their knees, their back, and other parts of their body. And also the same can be said about firefighters who have to lug around heavy pieces of equipment so that they are safe during their endeavors. And then the second question is, what physical parameters strongly affect the probability of a physical injury? And then the variables that we require to study this question is the weight, whether someone is under or overweight can also lead to different forms of injury, their height, their muscle mass, their age, their physical disability status. All of these physical parameters can strongly affect the different types of physical injury. So in conclusion, Sparta Science has introduced a product that helps prevent injuries and allows people to improve their physical conditions, not only as extreme as the Air Force, but also day-to-day people once it becomes provided to the public. So in analyzing the Sparta Science product in terms of the Air Force study, it shows promising results in improving the longevity of the human body. There is also possibility that these services will allow everyday people to prolong peak physical performance for their own needs and abilities. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation.